Imagine the silence of the night. The full moon softly illuminating the room where Alice lay, anxious for the day to come. The next day, she would be the happiest bride in the world. The flowers were ready, the dress carefully hung, and every detail of the wedding had been planned with so much care. But, in the midst of that calm, something unexpected happened. While she was organizing the last things, her hand found something hard and strange under the mattress. Curious, Alice pulled the object out. It was a diary, old and worn, as if it held long-buried secrets. Alice's heart raced, a mixture of curiosity and fear took hold of her. With trembling hands, she opened the first page. The name of her fiancé, written there in a familiar handwriting, made her stomach turn. And there, in those lines of faded ink, was something she could never have foreseen. Each word she read felt like a knife piercing deeper into her trust, into what she believed to be perfect love. At that moment, Alice knew that her life would never be the same again. The night that should have been one of peace and joy turned into a silent nightmare. And there, alone in her room, she began to realize that the man she was going to marry was hiding secrets that could destroy everything she knew. Alice was a young woman who had always dreamed of true love. Since she was a child, she believed in happy endings, in fairy tales where good always triumphed and love overcame all obstacles. Growing up in a small town, surrounded by friends and family who adored her, Alice was the embodiment of hope and joy. She was the kind of person who lit up any room with her smile, and her heart, always so generous, believed in the best in people. She had met her fiancé, Lucas, on one of those dates that seemed destined. He was charming, attentive, the kind of man any woman would want by her side. During the 2 years they were together, he had always been perfect in Alice's eyes. He treated her like a queen, always making a point of reminding her how special she was. Lucas was everything she had ever wanted, and when he proposed, Alice didn't hesitate to say yes. It all seemed like a dream. But now, sitting on the edge of the bed, with the diary in her hands, Alice began to question everything. The image of the perfect man she had built in her mind was beginning to unravel. The words in the diary were like knives to her heart, each one revealing a side of Lucas she never imagined existed. The man she thought she knew, the one who swore to love her, was holding dark secrets, secrets that could destroy everything she believed to be true. The initial shock gave way to a sense of profound betrayal. Alice, always so sure of herself, now felt lost, without ground. Her heart, which had once been full of love and expectation, was now filled with doubt and fear. She looked around the room, the one that would be the setting for her new beginning, and felt a deep sadness. The radiant bride she was supposed to be tomorrow was disappearing, being replaced by a woman full of uncertainty. With the diary still open in her hands, Alice felt the weight of each word she read. The air around her seemed denser, as if the environment itself was conspiring against her. She knew she could not ignore what she had discovered. Lucas's name, so often written with affection by herself, was now stained by confessions that made her question everything. As the pages of the diary revealed dark secrets, Alice found herself confronted with a terrifying truth: Lucas was not the man she thought she knew. The entries spoke of secret meetings, of carefully planned lies, and, even worse, of crimes. Crimes that he had committed and hidden with a coldness that she could never have imagined. Each sentence, each detail revealed, was like a web that closed around her. The Lucas she loved, whom she thought she knew, had a hidden face, a parallel life shrouded in darkness. Now, all the sweet words, the moments shared, seemed nothing more than a facade to cover up a frightening truth. Alice felt a chill down her spine as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in her mind. The unexplained absences, the lame excuses, the nights when he seemed distant, it all made sense now. But what tormented her most was the doubt that grew in her chest. Did she really know the man she was about to marry? With her eyes fixed on the diary, Alice realized that this object, which she had found by chance, was a sign, a revelation that had come to light on the last possible night. Now, she had to decide what to do with this information. The wedding was about to happen, but the revelation that lay before her changed everything. Should Alice confront Lucas with what she had discovered, risking everything they had built together? Or should she run away, leaving behind the dream of a future that now seemed more like a trap than a promise of happiness? Alice snapped the diary shut, her trembling hands revealing the whirlwind of emotions that fought inside her. Her breathing was heavy, and the silence of the night, which had once felt welcoming, was now suffocating her. She got up from the bed and began to pace around her room, trying to process what she had just learned. Every thought was a blow, every possibility an abyss. Alice began to wonder if she should confront Lucas immediately, but fear paralyzed her. What would he do if he knew she had discovered his secrets? What if he tried to hurt her to keep his past hidden? The danger seemed real, closer than she had ever imagined. But at the same time, the idea of going through with the wedding without doing anything was unbearable. How could she look him in the eye? How could she say "I do" in front of friends and family, knowing what she now knew? The trust that had once seemed unshakable was completely shattered. And with each passing minute, the tension inside her only grew. Alice began to search the house, searching for more clues, more evidence that could help her make a decision. Every drawer opened, every cupboard searched, only increased her sense of unease. She found more small signs that Lucas's life was a carefully woven lie, a web of deceit that now threatened to envelop her as well. Each new discovery made her heart beat faster, and the urgency to make a decision grew. She knew that time was against her. The wedding was only hours away, and every second of indecision brought her closer to a fate she was not ready to face. And then, in the midst of her desperate search, Alice found something that made her blood run cold, a letter, written recently, that seemed to reveal Lucas's next move. The words were clear, direct, and pointed to a plan that left her breathless. Now, more than ever, Alice understood that she was in a race against time. The tension reached its peak. With each new detail, the shadow hanging over Alice's future grew darker. She stood on the threshold of an impossible choice, and the pressure of deciding what to do threatened to crush her completely. Alice held the letter in trembling hands, its words still echoing in her mind. What Lucas was planning was darker than anything she could have imagined. Dread washed over her, but with the fear came a wave of clarity. She knew she couldn't continue to wallow in doubt. It was time to make a decision. She sat back down on the edge of the bed, the letter and the diary beside her, and took a deep breath, trying to calm the turmoil inside her. Her heart was torn between the hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding and the cold reality that the evidence presented. Alice had always considered herself a strong woman, but now, that strength was being tested in ways she could never have foreseen. She began to think about the consequences of each choice. Confronting Lucas meant putting herself in a dangerous position, exposing herself to a possible backlash that could be violent. But running away, disappearing before the wedding, also carried its own risks. She knew that if she did this, her life would change forever. There would be no going back. She would lose everything she had fought for, the love, the security, the dreams of a life together. But the thought of marrying a man who hid such terrible secrets was unbearable. How could she live a lie? How could she build a life with someone who might be lying to her every moment? The betrayal she felt was profound, and the pain, overwhelming. In the midst of these emotions, Alice realized that she needed to do something more before making her final decision. She needed to confront her own fears, to understand how far she was willing to go to protect herself. But most of all, she needed more information. There was something about Lucas that she still couldn't fully understand, something that held her captive, even in the midst of the darkness she had discovered. She knew she didn't have much time, but before she made any decisions, she needed to find the full truth, the one that lay beyond the pages of the diary and the letter. Alice stood up, determined to follow the clues that still remained, to seek answers to the questions that haunted her. And so, with her head held high and her heart heavy, she prepared herself to face whatever came, knowing that in the end, she would have to choose between the love she thought she knew and the security she so desperately needed. With new determination, Alice began to search the rest of the house, searching for any other clues that might help her understand the extent of Lucas's secret. Her steps were quick, her mind working a mile a minute. Every second counted, and she knew that time was against her. At the bottom of a drawer that had previously seemed insignificant, Alice found something that made her heart stop for a moment. It was a sealed envelope, addressed to someone she didn't know. Inside were photographs, images that captured moments Lucas had never mentioned. Alice recognized a few faces. They were people Lucas had described in passing in conversation, but now, the photographs showed a connection much deeper than he had ever admitted. But what really shook her was the last photograph. It was a recent image, taken in a place Alice knew well, her own home. In the photo, Lucas was with another woman, a dark expression in his eyes. They were talking, but what really disturbed her was the fact that the photo seemed to have been taken without Lucas knowing, as if someone was watching them from afar. There was something else going on, something that not even Lucas seemed to know. Alice felt a lump form in her throat. The situation was even more complex than she had imagined. That woman, that meeting, were all connected to the secrets Lucas had kept from her. And the twist she could never have foreseen, someone else was involved, someone who knew more than Alice and Lucas. The fear and anxiety returned with full force, but now mixed with a new feeling, anger. Alice was tired of being a pawn in someone's game. She deserved answers, she deserved the truth, and, most of all, she deserved to make her own choices based on everything she had discovered. Determined to confront Lucas, but knowing that she needed to be cautious, Alice put the photos back in the envelope and hid it in a safe place. She knew that the night would be long, and that the coming confrontation would be inevitable. But before she could face Lucas, she needed to find the woman in the photo, understand who she was and what her involvement meant. The new threat had come out of nowhere, and what had previously seemed like a simple case of betrayal was now turning into something much more sinister. Alice knew that the time to act was near, and that from now on, every step she took could lead her closer to the truth, or put her in even greater danger. With the envelope hidden and the weight of the new revelation pressing down on her chest, Alice felt a growing urgency. She needed to find out who the woman in the photo was and what her connection to Lucas was. The evening, once calm and promising, was now charged with an almost unbearable tension. Alice left the house, her heart hammering with each step. She had a vague idea of where she could find answers. There was a cafe that Lucas had mentioned casually a few times, always in a superficial way, as if it were of no importance. But now, this place seemed like the ideal starting point to understand what was really going on. When she arrived at the cafe, the place was almost empty, except for a few people who seemed immersed in their own worlds. Alice sat in a corner, trying to appear calm as she took in the surroundings. With each person who entered, her gaze was quick and attentive, searching for any sign of recognition, any clue that could link her to the woman in the photo. And then, Almost as if fate were playing a trick on her, the door opened and the woman in the photo walked in. She was exactly as she had been in the picture, elegant, with a confident posture, but there was something dark in her eyes. Alice felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't look away. She knew she had to understand what this woman represented. The woman sat down at a nearby table and started to play with her phone, oblivious to the fact that she was being watched. Alice, trying to gather her courage, took a deep breath and decided that she had to talk to her. Maybe this was the only chance to find out the truth before everything got out of control. Alice stood up and walked over to the woman's table, her mind spinning with questions. When she got close, the woman looked up, and their eyes met. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Alice noticed a slight surprise in the woman's expression, but she soon regained her composure, as if she already knew who Alice was. "You're Alice, aren't you?" the woman asked, her voice calm, but with a hint of something Alice couldn't quite place. These words took Alice by surprise. How did this woman know who she was? What had Lucas told her? Alice felt the tension in her shoulders grow, but she knew she couldn't back down now. "Yes, it's me. And I think we need to talk," Alice replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear that was building inside her. The woman smiled slightly, as if she had been expecting this, and motioned for Alice to sit down. What followed was a conversation Alice could never have anticipated. The woman wasn't just a stranger, she was someone who knew Lucas in a way Alice could never have imagined. And as the conversation progressed, the revelations became darker and darker. Lucas wasn't just a man with secrets, he was part of something much bigger, something that involved betrayal, danger, and perhaps even a threat to Alice's own life. With each word spoken, the woman seemed closer to Alice, as if she were trying to recruit her into a plan that was not yet entirely clear. Alice left that meeting with her mind reeling, her confidence completely shaken. The situation was far more complex and dangerous than she had imagined. Now she was trapped in a web of lies and manipulation, and the only thing she knew for sure was that she could trust no one. Not even herself. The weight of what was to come was overwhelming. Alice knew the final confrontation was approaching, but now, more than ever, she felt alone, helpless, and deeply afraid. What she did next could determine not only her future, but her very fate. Alice left the cafe, the cold night wind caressing her face, but the chill she felt came from within. The woman's words echoed in her mind, each revelation like a sharp knife, cutting through her perception of what was real. She wondered how far Lucas's involvement went and what else was hidden in the shadows. As she walked back home, one thought wouldn't leave her alone. Did Lucas know she had discovered something? Would his behavior the night before the wedding be any different? The fear Alice felt began to turn into a fierce adrenaline rush. She knew she had to confront him. She had to look into the eyes of the man who was about to become her husband and understand who he really was. When she got home, the door creaked slightly as it opened. The silence inside was thick, almost palpable. Alice moved carefully, each step calculated. Lucas was in the living room, sitting in an armchair, as if he had been waiting for her. When she entered, he looked up, and for a brief moment, Alice thought she saw something different in them, a shadow of concern, maybe even guilt. "Are you okay?" Lucas asked, his voice soft, but with an undertone that Alice now realized was sly. She held his gaze, her heart hammering but refusing to look away. The conversation with the woman in the cafe had given her a courage she hadn't known she had. Now, it was time to face the truth. "I found something today," Alice began, her voice steady, though inside she was in turmoil. "Something you've never told me. Something that changes everything between us." Lucas blinked in surprise, but quickly regained his composure. He stood up slowly, as if pondering his next words, and then, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he asked, "What do you think you know?" That question, so full of challenge, made Alice's blood run cold. He wasn't denying it, wasn't trying to convince her she was wrong. On the contrary, he seemed to be testing her limits, seeing how far she was willing to go to find out the truth. "I know enough to understand that you're not who I thought you were," Alice replied, keeping her voice steady. "I found the diary. I saw the photos. And I met someone who told me about you, about the other life you've been hiding from me." For a moment, there was deathly silence in the room. Lucas watched her, like a predator studying its prey. And then, something changed in him. The smile disappeared, replaced by a cold, almost calculating expression. "You really shouldn't have done that, Alice," he said, his voice now icy. "There are things that are better left buried. But it seems you've gone too far to turn back now." Alice felt a shiver run down her spine. The man standing before her, who was supposed to be her companion, now seemed like a stranger, someone she should be afraid of. The tension in the room was palpable, and Alice knew she had reached the point of no return. She had confronted Lucas, and now, not only her relationship, but perhaps even her very life, was at stake. Lucas took a step toward her, his gaze fixed on her, and Alice braced herself for the worst. But at the same time, something inside her flared, a strength she hadn't known she had. She knew she had to fight, not just for her safety, but for her very sanity. "Don't come near me, Lucas," Alice said, her voice firm but with a hint of fear she couldn't hide. "If there's something else you're hiding, I'll find out. And I won't let you manipulate me anymore." Lucas paused, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it looked like he was considering what to do next. And then, with a sigh almost of resignation, he took a step back. "You don't know what you're getting into, Alice. But if you want to keep going, so be it. Just don't say I didn't warn you." With those words, he turned and left the room, leaving Alice alone, her heart pounding and her mind in turmoil. The confrontation had happened, but the answers were still out of her reach. What would come next was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the truth, full and brutal, was about to be revealed, and Alice would have to be ready to face the consequences. Alice stood in the middle of the room, the sound of Lucas's footsteps fading into the distance. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with the promise of more revelations. She knew that this confrontation had changed everything, but at the same time, she felt that the real battle was just beginning. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, but one thing was certain: she would not back down. She took a deep breath and, with renewed determination, decided that she would not wait passively any longer. She needed to act, to find out what else Lucas was hiding before it was too late. She knew she didn't have much time. Lucas had made it clear that things would not stay as they were. Alice quickly climbed the stairs, heading straight for the room they shared. Her heart pounded as she searched every corner, every drawer, every hidden compartment that could possibly exist. She knew Lucas was no slouch. If he was hiding something, it would be hard to find. But Alice would not be intimidated. She needed more answers, more than just assumptions and half-truths. It was then that, as she pulled out one of the drawers of the cabinet, Alice found a small key, discreetly hidden beneath a pile of old papers. The key was old, worn by time, but it seemed important. She looked around, trying to figure out what it could open. Her gaze fell on a dark wooden chest, which she had always considered a simple piece of decoration. But now, with the key in her hand, she knew there was something more there. With trembling hands, Alice fitted the key into the chest's lock. As she turned, she heard a soft click, and the lid opened with a soft creak. Inside, she found a collection of documents, photos, and letters, all meticulously organized. Every piece of the puzzle was there, waiting to be put together. Alice began to leaf through the documents, and with each new page, the story that Lucas had kept from her unfolded before her eyes. There was evidence of criminal activity, connections to dangerous people, and a plan that had been in the works for much longer than she could have imagined. Lucas was not just a man with secrets, he was part of a complex and dark web, a network of corruption and betrayal that extended far beyond what Alice had imagined. But what shook her the most was a letter, addressed to her, dated recently. The words written in it were cold, almost mechanical, but they carried a clear message. Lucas knew she would find out, and he was prepared for it. The letter described his next steps, making it clear that he was ready for whatever she did. And most terrifying of all, he planned to act the night before the wedding, eliminating any obstacle, including her. Alice felt her blood run cold in her veins. She was faced with a terrible choice: run away and protect herself, or face Lucas with all the evidence she now had in her hands. She knew that either choice could have irreversible consequences. But one thing was certain: the life she knew, the future she had dreamed of, was completely destroyed. Now, all that was left was the naked truth, and the decision of how to deal with it. With her mind racing, Alice realized that time was running out. She needed to get out of there, plan her next steps carefully. But before she left, she took all the evidence, the photos, the letters, everything that could incriminate Lucas, and put them in a backpack. That would be her protection, her guarantee that she could escape this situation alive. She left the house, the weight of the evidence on her back, knowing that she was walking into the unknown. But this time, she was prepared for whatever came. She knew that the truth was finally in front of her, and she was willing to face Lucas, the man she thought she loved, to the bitter end. The final confrontation was near, and Alice had nothing left to lose. It was time to face reality, and she was ready to fight for her life and her freedom. With her backpack on her back and a heavy heart, Alice left the house that, until a few hours before, had symbolized her dreams and hopes. Now, that place was nothing more than a scene of betrayal and dark secrets. Every step she took away from the house seemed to sink even deeper into the reality of what was to come. The night was cold and silent, but inside her, a storm was raging. As she walked through the dark streets, Alice began to reflect on everything she had discovered. The image she had of Lucas was completely shattered. The man she loved was a lie, a facade to hide a calculating and dangerous being. And now, she was in the middle of a game she never asked to play, but from which she had no way of escaping. She paused for a moment, looking up at the moon high in the sky. How had things come to this? How had she, a woman who had always believed in the love and kindness of people, found herself in the midst of so much darkness? But at the same time, Alice felt something different growing inside her. It was no longer just fear or despair, it was a fierce determination. She had been deceived, betrayed, but she still had control over her actions. And she was determined to use it. Alice found a bench in the empty park and sat down, allowing herself a moment to rest. As she stood there, in the silence of the early morning, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in her mind. She had the evidence, she had the information. But more than that, she had a choice. She could use all of that to protect herself and, who knows, stop Lucas from hurting anyone else. She began to think about the possibilities. She could go to the police, report everything, use the evidence to ensure her safety. Or she could face Lucas one last time, confront him with the truth and make him understand that she was no longer the naive woman he thought she was. But more than anything, Alice knew that she had to do what was right, not only for herself, but for all the people who could fall victim to Lucas's plans. As these thoughts ran through her mind, Alice also allowed herself to reflect on the lessons she had learned on that terrible night. She had discovered a strength within herself that she didn't know she had. She had faced her deepest fears, and even though the future was still uncertain, she felt more prepared to face it than ever before. The moon was still shining brightly in the sky, and Alice realized that, despite everything, the night was about to end. And with the dawn, she knew that a new opportunity would come, a chance to start over, to rebuild her life away from the shadows that Lucas had created around her. And this time, she would take control of her destiny, without letting anyone else decide for her. With this new determination, Alice got up from the bench. She was tired, emotionally exhausted, but she knew what she had to do. The decision had been made. She would fight, she would expose Lucas and all his secrets. But she would do it her way, with intelligence and courage. And above all, she would not allow fear to dominate her again. As she walked away from the park, toward the uncertain future that awaited her, Alice knew her life would never be the same again. But for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with that. Because now, she was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Alice continued walking through the silent city, as the first light of dawn began to appear on the horizon. The sky, previously dark and threatening, began to take on a soft shade of blue, promising a new day. And with this new day, a new life. Alice felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. She was leaving behind a nightmare, but she still had to face the reality that dawn would bring. When she finally reached her destination, a small 24-hour cafe that she always frequented in difficult times, Alice went inside and sat at a table in the back, away from prying eyes. She ordered a strong coffee, needing something to calm her turbulent mind. While she waited, she took out her cell phone and began typing a message to the police, briefly explaining her situation and mentioning the evidence she had found. It was time to do the right thing. But before sending the message, Alice stopped and took a deep breath. She felt the need to think a little more about what she was about to do. Reporting Lucas meant starting a long and painful process, where her life would become public, and where she would have to relive every detail of that dark night. But Alice knew there was no other option. The truth had to be revealed, and Lucas had to be stopped. She took a sip of her coffee, feeling the comforting warmth of the liquid running down her throat, while she gathered the courage to press the send button. And then, in an act of deep reflection, she asked herself, what next? What would she do after all this storm passed? Where would she go? How would she rebuild her life? Alice realized that, although she was about to make the most difficult decision of her life, this would also be the opportunity for a new beginning. She could go anywhere, start over, without the shadows of the past haunting her. She would be free to create a new version of herself, stronger, wiser, and more cautious. Maybe, finally, she could find the peace she had been searching for. With this new perspective, Alice finally pressed the send button. The message was sent, and with it, a part of her burden began to lift. She knew the police would take action, but she also knew her journey was far from over. Lucas was not someone who would give up easily, and Alice would have to be prepared for whatever came next. But at the same time, she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. The act of taking control of her own life, of doing what was right, even in the face of fear, brought Alice a sense of power she had never felt before. She was no longer the naive, passionate woman she had once been. Now, She was someone who had faced the darkness and come out the other side, ready to face any challenge. As the cafe began to fill with the first customers of the morning, Alice got up and left the establishment, leaving behind yet another place filled with memories she would rather forget. The sun was already rising on the horizon, and with it, the promise of a new day. Alice knew the path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, she felt ready to take it. As she walked, the world around her began to awaken, and Alice realized that she, too, was waking up to a new reality. One where she was the protagonist of her own story, where the choices she made from then on would be hers and hers alone. And that, more than anything, gave her the strength to carry on. With each step, Alice felt the weight of the past lifting, and a new determination taking its place. She didn't know exactly what the future held for her, but she knew she was ready to face it. Because, in the end, what had started as a personal tragedy had turned into a journey of self-discovery and resilience. And this, she knew, was the beginning of something much greater. Alice walked through the streets lit by the soft light of dawn, feeling lighter with each step. The decision she had made, although difficult, had brought her a new sense of clarity. Now, more than ever, she knew that she was in control of her own life. The weight of the past was being lifted, and with it, the doubts and fears that had previously paralyzed her. As the sun rose above the horizon, Alice decided that she needed a plan for the future, one that didn't involve looking back, but moving forward with determination and courage. She knew that Lucas would be investigated, that her lies would be exposed, and that justice would take its course. But for Alice, the real victory wasn't in seeing Lucas punished, it was in her own ability to overcome this experience and emerge stronger than ever. She picked up her phone again, this time to do something different. She began searching for new places to live, new destinations where she could start her life over without the shadows of the past. Cities she had always wanted to visit, places where she could rediscover the joy and peace that had long since disappeared from her life. Alice knew she needed a fresh start, one where she could reconnect with who she truly was, without the shackles of a toxic relationship. As she did so, an idea began to take shape in her mind. What if she used this experience, this pain, to help others? She could start writing about her journey, sharing her lessons, and perhaps inspiring other women who were going through similar situations. The idea excited her, giving her a purpose that went beyond simply running away. It was time to turn her pain into strength, her story into a tool for empowerment. Alice knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt truly hopeful. The life she had planned with Lucas was dead, but a new life, full of possibilities, was being born. And this new life would be built by her, for her, without the negative influences that had previously controlled her. Before heading to the train station, Alice stopped one last time to look up at the sky, now completely clear with the sun shining brightly. She smiled to herself, knowing that no matter what happened, she was ready to face any challenge. Because Alice's true victory was not just escaping Lucas's control, but discovering the strength that had always been inside her, ready to be unleashed. With this new perspective, Alice took the final step toward the future that awaited her. And as she walked away, a sense of peace enveloped her. She knew that she was on her own path, and that from this moment on, every choice she made would be of her own free will. And so, with the sun shining down upon her, Alice began her new journey, a journey of self-discovery, resilience, and, above all, freedom. The world lay before her, full of possibilities, and Alice was finally ready to embrace them all. If you were touched by this story of overcoming and transformation, don't forget to like this video, comment your opinion and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring and thought-provoking stories. And share this story with someone who needs to hear that, No matter how dark the night, a new dawn will always bring hope.